All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're taking a deep dive into something I know a lot of you struggle with: improving English listening skills. And lucky for us, we've got a pretty awesome guide chock full of tips and tricks to unpack.
And you know what's funny? A lot of people, when they're learning a new language, they get so hung up on the speaking part or like nailing down the grammar. But honestly, without solid listening skills, you're not getting anywhere. Communication it falls apart.
So true. I'm totally guilty of that myself. I'll be obsessing over my pronunciation for hours, then I'll get into a conversation and completely blank out just because, their accent is a little different.
Happens all the time. And this guide, it tackles that head on. It digs into those specific hurdles that, a lot of us face when it comes to English listening.
Okay, so let's break those down. What are some of the things that tend to trip people up? I know the guide touched on speed, accents, and vocabulary as big ones, right?
Oh, for sure. First off, the sheer speed at which native speakers can talk. It's a lot. And then on top of that, you've got this whole world of accents and dialects. Like, take Australian English. It can sound like a completely different language from American English, even though, technically it's all English.
It's like my brain goes into overload, and then you've got the vocabulary hurdle. Even if you've got a decent vocabulary, there's always going to be that word, that phrase that you've never heard before, especially when you start branching out into more specialized stuff.
Right. And sometimes, even if you recognize the words, they're not being used the way you're used to. Idioms and phrasal verbs, they're notorious for that. Their meanings aren't always so literal.
I'll never forget the first time I heard someone say, kick the bucket. I was like, what are they talking about? I literally pictured someone kicking a bucket.
Classic. And don't forget about connected speech. Native speakers tend to blend words together, and it can be a real challenge to pick out those individual words, especially when you're still getting used to the rhythm of the language.
It's like trying to crack a secret code sometimes. And then, of course, the good old background noise. Trying to have a conversation in, like a bustling cafe or on a busy street. It's like trying to hear a whisper in a windstorm.
Seriously.
No.
Your brain is working overtime to filter out all those distractions and just lock onto the actual speech. No wonder English listening can feel so demanding.
So it sounds like our brains are doing this incredible balancing act, trying to keep all these plates spinning while decoding a whole new language. What are some ways to make this whole process a little less, overwhelming?
Well, the guide really hammers home the idea of active listening. Basically, you're consciously engaging with what you're listening to, making a real effort to understand and process it.
Okay, so active listening sounds like a good place to start. What are some specific techniques that fall under that umbrella?
The guide breaks down 3 main ones. First up, focus on the speaker. It sounds obvious, right? But it's so easy to get sidetracked. Put the phone away, close the laptop, and find a quiet spot where you can really zero in on what they're saying.
Makes sense. It's just so easy to get distracted these days.
Absolutely. Second technique, note-taking. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but jotting down key points or any words you're not familiar with can help that information stick. Makes it easier to remember later.
Okay, I see how that would be helpful, but honestly, sometimes I find taking notes more distracting than helpful. I'm so focused on writing that I miss what the speaker is saying. Any tips for avoiding that trap?
Definitely. Instead of just writing words, try doodling. Make little sketches that relate to what you're hearing. It's kind of fun, and it gets different parts of your brain working, creating stronger memory links.
I love that idea, like creating a little visual map of the information.
Right. And last but not least, we have summarizing. So after you've listened to something, take a minute to summarize what you heard in your own words. It's a fantastic way to check if you've really grasped those key points.
So you're forcing yourself to actively process the information instead of just passively letting it wash over you.
That's the idea. It's turning input into output.
Okay, I'm liking these active listening techniques. They're super practical and, doable. What else does the guide suggest?
It really stresses getting exposure to a variety of accents and voices.
Right, because English isn't just one thing, it's spoken all over the world, and each region has its own unique spin on it. But sometimes it's like I'm learning a whole new language when I encounter a new accent.
Tell me about it. It can be overwhelming. But honestly, the more you hear different accents, the more your brain adapts and becomes more flexible. It's like you're training your ear to decipher all these different ways of speaking English.
So what are some good ways to do that? Does the guide mention any resources?
It recommends checking out a bunch of different stuff. Podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube videos, even movies and TV shows from different English-speaking countries can help. The key is to pick stuff you're actually interested in so it doesn't feel like a chore.
That's key. If I'm not enjoying it, I'm probably not going to stick with it. I actually started listening to this true crime podcast from Australia recently, and I swear I'm starting to pick up on some of their accent quirks. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. And here's a pro tip. Don't just passively listen. Really try to tune in to the specifics of each accent, the rhythm, the intonation, even the way they pronounce things. You might even pick up some cool slang or expressions along the way.
Like adding new spices to your language palette. But what about those times when you run into an accent that's so thick you can barely understand a word? What do you do then?
Well, the guide makes it clear. It's okay to start slow. Especially if you're just starting out, there's no need to jump into the deep end right away.
So starting with slower, clearer audio can make a big difference.
Huge. It's like learning to walk before you can run, right? The guide suggests looking into apps made for language learning or YouTube channels that are beginner-friendly. They tend to use simpler language and a slower pace, which can be super helpful when you're first getting your feet wet.
And as you get better, you can gradually move on to tougher stuff.
You know what I also find helpful, especially at the beginning? Subtitles.
Oh, absolutely. Think of them as training wheels for your ears. They give you that visual backup, helping you match the words you're hearing with their written form. The guide suggests, if you're a beginner, start with subtitles in your own language. Then, as you get more comfortable, switch to English subtitles.
And eventually, ditch them all together.
Exactly. The goal is to challenge yourself and become a more independent listener.
So we've got active listening, immersing ourselves in different accents, and using subtitles as a crutch. What other strategies does this guide recommend?
A couple more that I think you'll find pretty useful. One is, don't be afraid to slow down the audio playback speed.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Most video platforms and podcast apps have that option. So if you're struggling to keep up, just slow it down to like 0.75 speed or even half speed.
Exactly. It's a game changer, especially for faster talkers. You can actually hear each word, each syllable clearly. It makes processing everything much easier. And then, as you get the hang of it, you can bump the speed back up, like a workout for your ears.
Speaking of workouts, have you ever heard of shadowing? The guide mentions it as a fantastic way to work on your listening and speaking at the same time.
Shadowing? No, I don't think so. What's that?
Basically, you listen to a recording and try to mimic the speaker. Like copy their rhythm, their intonation, their pronunciation, all in real time. It's like karaoke, but for language learning.
That sounds kind of tricky. Wouldn't that be distracting if you're trying to understand what they're saying?
It takes a little getting used to, yeah. But the key is to focus on the sounds, not on understanding every single word. Think of it like a dance. You're matching the rhythm and flow of the music, not focusing on the individual steps.
Okay, I think I get it. So shadowing helps you develop a better ear for English sounds and improves your pronunciation at the same time.
Bingo. 2 birds, 1 stone. It's a really powerful technique.
I'm definitely going to have to give that a try. What else does this guide have up its sleeve?
Well, it puts a big emphasis on good old vocabulary building, which of course is crucial for understanding any language.
Of course, vocabulary is the foundation. The more words you know, the easier it is to understand what people are saying. But building vocab can feel like such a slog. Where do you even start?
The guide recommends 2 main strategies. First one, learn new words in context. Don't just memorize definitions from a list. Try to pick up new words from stuff you're already listening to.
So, like, if I hear a word I don't recognize in a podcast, I should try to figure out what it means based on the other words around it and the overall topic.
Exactly. And then try using that word yourself in your own sentences. It helps solidify your understanding way better than just rote memorization.
Makes sense. It connects the word to a real-life situation. What's the second strategy?
Focus on idioms and phrasal verbs. Those quirky expressions that, well, they just don't make sense if you translate them literally. They pop up all the time in everyday English, so mastering them can really boost your understanding.
Oh, I know those. Idioms can be so tricky, like kick the bucket. Why would you say it like that? It's such a roundabout way to say someone died. Any tips for actually remembering those?
Oh, for sure. This works for me. Try to visualize them. Create a funny little picture in your head that represents the idiom. So for kick the bucket, imagine someone literally kicking a bucket right before they,
That's hilarious. The sillier and more memorable, the better, right?
Right. It helps anchor the meaning in your mind.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like we're just getting started. What other nuggets of wisdom does this guide offer?
Well, all this learning, it needs to be put into practice. The guide stresses the importance of actually using your listening skills in real life situations.
Right. Listening to podcasts at home is one thing, but you've got to get out there and use your ears in the wild.
Exactly. The guide's a big advocate for talking with native speakers whenever you get the chance. Whether it's through those language exchange apps, conversation groups, or just chatting with English-speaking friends.
Those are great ideas. But not everyone has access to native speakers, right? What about those of us learning English in a place where it's not the primary language?
Good point. The guide addresses that too. It suggests adding some passive listening into your routine.
Passive listening? What's that?
Basically, listening to English in the background while you're doing other things, like when you're commuting, working out, even just doing chores around the house. Could be podcasts, music, audiobooks, even just having the TV on in the background.
So it's like immersing yourself in the language without having to carve out specific study time.
Exactly. You're turning everyday stuff into learning opportunities.
I love that. I used to listen to English radio while I was making dinner, and honestly, it did wonders for my listening without me even realizing it.
Perfect example. It's amazing how much our brains soak up even when we're not laser focused on learning.
I'm really digging all these practical tips. What else is in this guide?
Well, it also talks about how important it is to track your progress.
Yeah.
And, celebrate your wins along the way.
Yeah, learning a language can be discouraging sometimes. So it's important to remind yourself how far you've come. What are some good ways to track your progress?
The guide suggests setting specific goals for yourself, like I'm going to listen to 5 podcasts this week, or I'm going to watch 2 hours of English TV. It also mentions taking listening tests. There are some good ones online. It gives you a more objective view of your skills.
So it's about setting goals you can actually measure and holding yourself accountable.
You got it. And don't underestimate the power of reflecting on your own progress. After you listen to something, take a minute to think. What did I understand? Where did I struggle? What can I do better next time?
It's like becoming more aware of your strengths and weaknesses as a listener.
Precisely. And remember, improving your English listening skills is a journey, not a sprint. It's about finding what works for you and enjoying the process.
That's such a great reminder. I'm loving this deep dive so far. We've covered so much, and I'm already feeling more confident about my listening.
That's awesome. And guess what? We've still got a lot more to explore. When we come back, we'll be diving into some even more advanced techniques to fine-tune your listening comprehension and really take your skills to the next level.
I'm excited to hear it. Okay, so we're back and ready to go even deeper on these English listening strategies. Before the break, you were teasing some more advanced techniques. I'm all about leveling up my listening game, so lay it on me.
All right, you asked for it. Now, fair warning. Some of these techniques, they're a little bit like brain training. But trust me, they can make a huge difference in how well you listen and understand.
Brain training. Sounds intriguing. What's the first technique on the list?
It's called predictive listening. Basically, you're using your knowledge, your understanding of the context to kind of guess what you're going to hear next.
So it's like trying to anticipate where the conversation is heading based on what you already know.
Exactly. Imagine you're listening to a podcast, right? And it's about climate change. You probably already know a thing or two about climate change, and you can use that knowledge to kind of predict what the speaker might talk about. The causes, the effects, maybe some potential solutions.
Right. And as you listen, you can start to narrow down those predictions based on the words and phrases you're hearing.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle. You have some pieces, and you're trying to figure out where the missing ones fit.
I love that analogy. And it makes listening way more active. You're not just passively absorbing, you're actively trying to anticipate what's coming next.
Exactly. And as you get better at it, you'll find you can follow along with faster speech, more complex topics, much easier.
So predictive listening, that's all about using our brains to anticipate. What other mental tricks can we use to become better listeners?
There's another powerful one. It's all about paying attention to what we call prosodic features.
Prosodic features. Okay, that sounds a little technical. Break that down for me.
Think of it as like the music of language. It includes things like intonation, rhythm, stress, even pauses. They give you so much information beyond just the words themselves.
Oh, I see. So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it.
Exactly. For example, a rising intonation at the end of a sentence. That usually means it's a question, even if the words themselves don't form a question.
Right. Or a speaker might emphasize certain words to make them stand out or to express a particular emotion.
Exactly. Paying attention to those subtle cues. It can totally change how you understand what the speaker's trying to say and their mood.
It's like reading between the lines, but with your ears.
That's a great way to put it. As you become more tuned into these features, you'll pick up on little nuances of meaning that you might have missed before.
Okay, so we've got predictive listening, prosodic features. I'm taking notes. Any other advanced techniques we should be trying?
One more. Try focusing on discourse markers.
Discourse markers. I'm not sure I've heard that one before. What are those exactly?
They're words or phrases that help structure spoken language, make it more organized. They're like signposts guiding the listener through the conversation.
Oh, interesting. So they're like punctuation marks for spoken English, helping us understand how different ideas are connected.
Exactly. Words like however, moreover, therefore. Phrases like as a result, in addition to. Those are all discourse markers.
Right. I can see how those would make it easier to follow the conversation, to understand how different thoughts fit together.
Exactly. By paying attention to those markers, you can anticipate what's coming next, see how the ideas build on each other.
It's like having a mental outline of the conversation, which makes it way easier to process the information.
Exactly. And the more you practice listening for them, the more you'll appreciate the art of spoken language.
This is all super helpful, but honestly, it sounds like it takes a lot of concentration, a lot of effort. Any tips for making English listening practice feel less like work and more like, fun?
Oh, for sure. Having fun is key. It's all about staying motivated. One way to make it more enjoyable, challenge yourself with different types of listening material.
So, branching out from my usual podcasts and TV shows, what other kinds of stuff could I be listening to?
Think outside the box. Stuff you might not normally listen to, even in your own language. How about lectures, debates, interviews, maybe audiobooks on a challenging topic?
Ooh, debates sound fun. It would force me to pay attention to different points of view, different arguments.
Exactly. It's a great way to sharpen your critical thinking skills, become a more, discerning listener. And don't underestimate the power of going back to familiar material.
So like re-listening to podcasts or re-watching shows I've already seen.
Yep. You'll be surprised by how much more you pick up the second or even the third time around. You're not struggling with the basic meaning anymore. You can focus on those subtle details, the prosodic features, the discourse markers. It adds a whole new layer to the experience.
It's like watching your favorite movie again and noticing things you missed the first time.
Exactly. And every time you revisit that material, you're reinforcing those connections in your brain, making it easier to process English effortlessly.
You know, you're right. The more I listen to something, the easier it gets to understand. It's like my brain's getting used to the sounds, the patterns of English.
Exactly. And that familiarity breeds confidence. And confidence is essential for becoming a fluent listener.
You know, all this talk about neural pathways and brain training, it really makes you appreciate how amazing our brains are. They have this incredible capacity to learn, to adapt, especially when it comes to language.
It's true. Our brains are constantly forming new connections, rewiring themselves based on our experiences. The more we expose ourselves to English, the more our brains become fine-tuned to the sounds, the rhythms, the patterns.
It's like our brains are these super-powered pattern recognition machines. They're always looking for order and meaning in this chaos of sound.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the better our brains get at recognizing those patterns and decoding them, even in tough listening environments.
It's like we're training our brains to be super efficient English decoders.
Precisely. And as you decode more and more, understanding and following along becomes easier and easier.
But what about those times when you feel completely lost? Like you're missing huge chunks of information. Any advice for dealing with that frustration?
It's so important to remember that learning a language, it's a journey, not a race. It's okay to get frustrated sometimes, especially in the beginning.
It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking you need to understand everything perfectly right away, and that's just not realistic.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on what you're missing, try to focus on what you are getting. Even if it's just a few words, a couple of phrases, celebrate those little victories.
It's like finding those hidden gems in a puzzle. Every little piece you understand gets you closer to the full picture.
And those small wins, they keep you motivated, keep you going. And remember, even native English speakers, they don't catch every single word in every conversation.
That's actually comforting to know. We all have those moments where we zone out or mishear something.
For sure. It's all about developing strategies for dealing with those gaps in comprehension. Sometimes the context can give you clues.
Like, if you hear someone say, "It's raining cats and dogs," you wouldn't think that actual animals were falling from the sky. You'd understand from the context that it just means it's raining really hard.
Exactly. And if you're really unsure, don't be afraid to ask for clarification.
Right. It's so simple, but it's so powerful. Instead of just letting the confusion build, just politely ask the person to repeat themselves or maybe rephrase what they said.
Most people are totally happy to do that. Especially if they know you're learning English. It shows you're interested. You want to understand.
And who knows, you might even learn a new word or expression in the process.
Absolutely. Every conversation is a chance to learn. Speaking of chances, let's talk about how to create a more immersive English-speaking environment for yourself, even if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
This is so important. It's about making English a part of your everyday life, not just something you study in a book. So, what are some practical ways to do that?
One of the easiest ways, surround yourself with English language media. We talked about podcasts, audiobooks, but there's also music, movies, TV shows, even YouTube channels.
Right. It's about finding things you actually enjoy and making them a part of your downtime.
Exactly. Make it a habit to watch your favorite TV show with English subtitles. Listen to English music while you cook or work out. Follow some English-speaking creators on social media. It's about making English a normal part of your day.
And the more you hear the language in different situations, the more your brain starts to absorb those sounds, those patterns, without you even having to think about it.
Exactly. And as your listening improves, you can enjoy those things even more. You start to pick up on the jokes, the nuances in the dialogue, the emotional depth of the story. It's like a whole new level of appreciation.
You know, you're so right. When I first started watching movies in English, I had to rely on subtitles big time. But now I can follow along much easier. I can get the humor, the emotions. It's a way richer experience.
That's great to hear. And that enjoyment, it's essential. It keeps you motivated to keep learning, keep pushing yourself. It's not about forcing yourself to do something boring. It's about finding those things that spark your passion for English.
And when you're genuinely enjoying yourself, learning just happens. You don't even think of it as studying. You're just lost in something you love. And that's when the magic happens.
It's like the difference between reading a textbook and getting lost in a great novel. When you're engaged, invested, the learning becomes automatic.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new approach to English listening.
That's great to hear. And believe it or not, we've just scratched the surface. There's still more to discover. When we come back, we'll talk about some extra strategies to really fine-tune your comprehension and take your skills to the next level.
I can't wait. We're back for the final stretch of our deep dive on English listening. You mentioned some next level strategies earlier, so I'm ready to hear more. What else can we do to really sharpen these skills?
Well, we've covered a lot, but there are a few more techniques that can really help you refine your listening. Think of it like fine-tuning an instrument, getting everything perfectly in sync.
I like that. So where do we start with this fine-tuning?
Let's talk about chunking. Basically, you group words and phrases together in your mind into meaningful units instead of trying to process every single word separately.
Chunking. That rings a bell. I think I've come across that term before, maybe with memory techniques.
Yeah, it's super helpful for both memory and decomprehension. When you're listening, chunking helps you see the forest for the trees. Instead of getting lost in all the individual words, you're focusing on the overall message, the big picture.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But how do you actually do it? How do you train your brain to do that, to group words together like that?
It kind of happens naturally as you get more comfortable with the language.
Yeah.
But you can also practice it by really paying attention to the pauses and the intonation patterns in spoken English.
So the pauses and intonation, they act like natural dividers between those chunks of information.
Exactly. They're like the commas and periods of spoken language, guiding you through the flow of information.
I see, yeah. I'll definitely start listening for those cues more carefully. Anything else that helps with chunking?
Honestly, practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
The more you listen, the better your brain gets at recognizing those natural chunks. It's like you're training your ear to hear the rhythm of the language.
Got it. I'm all about practice. So what other fine-tuning tricks should we be adding to our toolkit?
Let's talk about inference. It's basically the ability to read between the lines, draw conclusions and make educated guesses about what you're hearing, even if the speaker doesn't spell everything out.
Inference, okay.
Yeah.
So kind of like filling in the blanks based on what you already know and what you're hearing.
Exactly. It's a really important skill for effective listening, especially when the language gets more complex or nuanced. You're connecting the dots, making sense of the message, even when some information is missing.
Can you give me an example of inference in action?
Sure. Let's say you overhear someone saying, I can't believe I left my umbrella at home again. Now I'm drenched. Even though they didn't say it's raining, you can figure that out from what they did say, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like a little mental puzzle using the clues to figure out the missing pieces.
Exactly. And the more you practice inference, the better you'll get at understanding those implied meanings, those connections between different bits of information.
Okay, so we've got chunking, inference, both going on the list of things to try. What else can we do to become even better listeners?
All these techniques, they work best when you've got a solid base of vocabulary and grammar knowledge. The more you understand the building blocks of the language, the easier it is to make sense of what you're hearing.
It's like having a bigger toolbox, right? The more tools you have, the more equipped you are to handle whatever comes your way.
That's a great way to put it. So keep building your vocabulary, keep working on your grammar, and keep practicing those listening techniques. It all comes together to make you a stronger listener.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of what it takes to be a good listener, and I'm so ready to put all these techniques into practice.
That's fantastic. Remember, be patient with yourself, find what works for you, and most importantly, have fun. The more you enjoy it, the more you'll learn.
Couldn't agree more. And to everyone listening, keep those ears open, keep exploring the wonderful world of the English language, and never stop learning.